Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for what might be, and I mean this, the most monumental and frankly intimidating journey we've ever taken into a stack of source material.
It's a big one.
It's a huge one. We have this intensive exploration here of cosmic history, spiritual architecture. I mean, it proposes nothing less than a completely alternative history of Earth. We're talking hundreds of thousands of years.
Right. And this isn't just theory. The sources lay out a framework involving gods, giants, genetic manipulation, and this profound ongoing spiritual conflict that, and this is the key, is supposedly manifesting in your daily life right now.
That's the part that's so staggering. So let's frame this for everyone.
Okay, so the core premise we're unpacking today really revolves around this one radical question. How did our planet Earth go from being, a pristine spiritual garden into what the research calls a crossroads in our galaxy?
A crossroads, meaning a meeting point.
A battleground, really. It suggests Earth became the place where evolutions loyal to light, that's the purest aspect of humanity, collided with others totally committed to darkness. And we're talking about various embodied angels and even foreign life waves who brought their conflicts here.
And it's critical to say this is not just mythology or ancient history for them. The sources we have claim these very same power-seeking anti-light forces are still operating today.
Exactly. Wielding influence over global finance, politics, media, even the chemical makeup of our society.
So our mission for this deep dive is, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, we need to unpack this entire history. We're going to detail the two great spiritual falls, the corruption of early civilizations like Lemuria and Atlantis that followed, and then, and this is crucial, identify the specific strategies of control these entities supposedly use in the modern world.
And then we bring it home?
Then we bring it home. We'll connect this history to modern prophecy and explore the spiritual action plan, what the sources call the alchemical key that's been provided to humanity to transcend and ultimately defeat these millennia-old forces.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by laying the cosmological foundation, and that means going back to a time, well, far beyond what any historian would recognize, back to the primordial drama.
So, to really grasp the stakes here,
we
first have to understand this concept of ancient memory. The source material suggests that it's a soul memory that resides within a lot of us.
An inner knowing?
Sort of. An inner awareness of these golden age civilizations, Lemuria and Atlantis. And these weren't just, theoretical cultures in a storybook. They were physical continents.
Okay.
Places where humanity was guided by these incredibly advanced adepts. You might know them as ascended masters. And the laws of God weren't debated. They weren't philosophy. They were known, applied scientific principles.
It paints a picture of, almost perfect societies. But they failed. We know they failed. Both continents sank, right? Lemuria in the Pacific, Atlantis in the Atlantic.
They did.
So what was the mechanism of that failure? Because the sources are clear. It wasn't just, a geological event.
No, not at all. It was a massive spiritual compromise, a compromise with the light, which led directly to their destruction. And it really set the stage for the intense duality we see today.
And this darkness, it didn't just appear out of nowhere.
No, it came through what the sources describe as two distinct consecutive falls of heavenly beings. And understanding that there were two is really the key to reconciling a lot of conflicting ancient texts.
Okay, so let's start with the first one, the one that's probably most familiar, at least in Western theology, the fall of Lucifer. What was his central error?
Lucifer's rebellion at its core was rooted in pride, but the sources give a very specific trigger. It was his refusal to serve God's own offspring, mankind.
He was jealous.
Deeply jealous of the divine spark that God placed within humanity, creating us in his own image. Lucifer refused to bow before that potential, and in that act of rebellion, he was cut off from his original divine source, his infinite supply of energy. Gone.
Okay, but if you're a being of that magnitude and you're suddenly cut off from your power source, how do you sustain yourself? This is where the whole mechanism of spiritual parasitism begins, isn't it?
Precisely. That's the perfect word for it. Having lost his ability to generate his own light, Lucifer and the angels who fell with him, they still had this immense but now finite momentum of energy. To keep existing, they had to become parasites.
Feeding off of us?
They had to seduce the children of light humanity, pull them away from their own connection to the God source, and in doing so, they could siphon off our spiritual energy, our light. That act, that seduction and drainage, is the core definition of the battle of light versus darkness on Earth.
Wow. That makes the conflict incredibly personal. But you stress that the story doesn't stop there. This is where we shift to the second fall, the one that's much more physical, the one detailed in the Book of Enoch.
This is a crucial pivot point, and the research highlights that the Book of Enoch was considered canonical and was highly respected by Jesus Christ. It describes this catastrophic fall of a group called the Watchers, and it was prompted not by pride, but by overwhelming lust for the daughters of men.
Lust. I mean, that implies a physical body, corporeal embodiment, which is a detail a lot of modern spiritual traditions seem to minimize or ignore completely.
And it's detailed right there in Enoch. 200 of these angels, led by a being named Samyaza, they descended. And they knew what they were doing was a deep transgression, so they bound themselves by what the text calls mutual execration. Curses, sealing a pact to share the guilt of their actions. They physically took human wives, and in the process, they taught them, and the men, the twisted secrets of heaven.
What kind of secret?
Things like sorcery, incantations, divination, basically corrupting divine knowledge for material gain and control.
And their children. Their offspring were the mythological figures we call the Nephilim, the giants. And the description of them in the sources it's truly horrific. It moves from this mythical idea to an actual societal destroyer.
Oh, the description is visceral. Their hunger was insatiable. They devoured all the planet's resources, birds, beasts, fish, the produce of the earth. But here's the critical escalation. When that wasn't enough, their hunger couldn't be met, so they eventually turned on and devoured Homo sapiens themselves.
So when the source material calls this economic cannibalism, it means it on a literal ancient level.
Exactly. They consume not just the food supply, but the very life force of humanity. It's a profound concept.
Using the horror of mythological giants to underpin a spiritual lot of financial oppression, that's a powerful synthesis. And these giants weren't just gluttons, were they? They were also the first great architects of physical warfare.
They were. The Watchers brought the knowledge of destructive technology down with them. A specific angel named Azazel taught men how to create all the instruments of war. Swords, knives, shields, breastplates. It's not presented as humanity naturally evolving conflict.
No, it's a deliberate act.
It's a deliberate act by a vengeful, fallen intelligence to teach humanity how to annihilate itself.
And this inevitably led to divine judgment. This is the Great Flood, the sinking of Atlantis.
Right. The Lord responded by ordering the archangels to intervene, bind Azazel, destroy the children of fornication through internal slaughter among themselves, and then send the flood to cleanse the earth of the giant's physical presence. But this brings us to a really crucial point about history and suppression.
Okay, you said before, here's where it gets really interesting. The point about the early church fathers. They apparently had a massive doctrinal conflict over this second fall.
Yes, a huge one. The post-Nicaea early church fathers were deeply uncomfortable with the Enochian account, precisely because it described angels physically embodying due to lust. They much preferred the simplified, non-corporeal narrative of Lucifer's fall through pride, which you find in Isaiah 14.
Why? What was the threat?
Well, they were looking for a more theological or abstract explanation for evil. The idea of embodied spiritual enemies walking among them was threatening to their concept of a structured, untouchable, heavenly hierarchy.
So basically they suppressed the doctrine. The idea that spiritual beings could embody and walk among us, it makes evil a more abstract problem, not a concrete physical threat you might meet on the street.
Precisely. By minimizing the Watcher's fall, they made evil sound less personal, less corporeal, and therefore less immediate. However, the source material argues that 20th century scholarships, specifically the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the work validating Enoch's importance, it resolves this whole contradiction.
How does it resolve the tension between a fall from pride and a fall from lust?
It suggests there is no contradiction, because there were two separate celestial events, separated by eons of time. The earlier fall was the rebellious archangel, Lucifer, and that was rooted in pride. The much later event was the Watchers, and that was rooted in lust and the desire for corporeal experience.
And that reconciliation, it validates the core claim of the research we're looking at.
It does. It validates the claim that embodied fallen angels, carrying the progeny and the consciousness of the Nephilim, have continued to incarnate on Earth for millennia.
Which puts them in positions of power throughout all of human history.
That's the staggering realization. If they're embodied, they have to follow the rules of karma and reincarnation. It means they are continually returning to the stage of Earth, carrying that same ancient grudge and that same blueprint for control.
That is a key takeaway. It forces us to acknowledge that certain powerful figures today might not be merely selfish humans, but could be, in fact, those who fell, became mortal, and are carrying this deep-seated institutional contempt for the divine plan and for all the souls who are striving for the light. Okay, so we've established this primordial enemy and its corporeal nature. This brings us to the next massive cosmic phase, how these two falls and all the chaos that came from them led humanity from those pristine golden ages into, well, into the world of intense duality and struggle we inhabit now. We need to talk about these root races and the descent into matter.
Right. The esoteric science here describes Earth as being destined to embody 7 primary groups of souls, or root races, over its entire history. The first 3, we're told, lived in profound harmony. They fulfilled their divine blueprint on the etheric plane.
So not fully physical yet.
Not like we understand it. The catastrophic fall of man that we all know, that occurred during the 4th root race on Lemuria, and it's symbolized by the Adam and Eve archetype.
They succumbed to the temptations of the fallen angels, the serpent, to experiment with what the Source calls the energy veil. What exactly is this energy veil or the forbidden fruit?
It wasn't a literal apple, of course. It was the fateful choice to engage in the belief in an existence that is separate from God. This was the entry point into duality, the belief in relative good and evil, rather than the absolute good of the etheric plane.
So by making that choice,
The soul lost its innocence, and human consciousness immediately lowered its frequency from that plane of oneness down to the dense physical plane. The light-bearers compromised the standard of absolute good, and that introduced the concept of imperfection into their world.
And once that energetic breach happened, the door just swung wide open, allowing all these foreign disruptive influences to enter the evolutionary stream of Earth. This is where the notorious laggards come into the picture.
Exactly. The fall in Lemuria created a spiritual vacuum, an opening that allowed these laggard evolutions from other compromised solar systems and planets to start incarnating on Earth through that 4th root race.
And the most notable origin point mentioned is a planet called Maldek.
Maldek, a planet whose inhabitants, the sources say, had already willfully rebelled against God's laws. They had chosen advanced technology and self-will over any kind of divine guidance.
So the pure Earth souls, the light bearers, they volunteered to try and teach these advanced but spiritually crippled laggards, but that teaching mission backfired spectacularly.
It failed because the majority of these laggards, while they were technologically brilliant, were willfully rebellious against God. Their entry just accelerated the tearing down of virtue and sacred geometry on Earth. The figure of Cain, the firstborn who killed his brother, he symbolizes this corrupted civilization.
So civilization of what?
Materialism, debauchery, and the compromise of the seed of light. That's the quote.
And the crucial element here is the science they brought with them.
Yes, this is so important. This was not primitive man being corrupted by some simple superstition. These were sophisticated laggards, and they taught the less experienced Earth evolutions their advanced and destructive science they had mastered on Maldek.
What kind of science are we talking about?
We're talking about the deliberate manipulation of material substance. This includes knowledge of how to split the atom,
Nuclear power.
harnessing nuclear power, creating life in a test tube, and using ultrasonic weapons. This injection of a godless, materialistic science guaranteed that the conflict that followed, the one leading up to the sinking of Atlantis, would be highly destructive.
And this destructive trend, it reached its terrifying peak in Atlantis with genetic engineering. This sounds less like science and more like spiritual horror.
It was absolutely spiritual horror. Atlantean scientists, who were fully under the sway of the fallen ones and these laggards, engaged in hideous genetic engineering. They didn't just play with genes. They mingled animal and human life,
Resulting in
the grotesque, monstrous creatures that we find in mythology. They sought to imprison God's creation, the pure, individualized expression of life, in these monstrous creatures, like centaurs, satyrs, and other chimerae. It was a deliberate defilement of the divine image.
But the manipulation wasn't just limited to external creatures, was it? They targeted the human mind and soul itself by cracking the DNA code.
Exactly. They discovered the secret of what's called the cybernetic control of the human brain. By tampering with the RNA and DNA chains, they aimed to alter humanity's capacity for spiritual or psychic awareness.
So the goal was to stunt the soul.
To stunt the soul faculties of the light bearers, blunt their receptivity to divine intelligence, and thus render them incapable of achieving personal Christhood or even fighting back. They wanted obedient, spiritually blind servants.
What's truly insightful is how the source material connects this ancient genetic horror directly to our modern psyche. I mean, why should we care about Atlantean chimerae now?
Because that history, it remains embedded in the collective subconscious of everyone alive today. It's an indelible race memory.
And that subconscious record is cited as an underlying cause of what?
Modern-day anxiety, deep-seated hysteria, chronic insomnia, and our collective vulnerability to strong, manipulative leaders, demagogues. It also explains our profound, universal fascination with stories like the Golem and Frankenstein.
So the golem, the man-made servant that revels, and Frankenstein, the creature brought to life by man's hubris that turns on its maker, these are a form of collective necessary catharsis.
That's precisely the mechanism.
We're processing the race memory of being genetically controlled and subjugated by powerful beings we once trusted.
It's a group subconscious attempt to neutralize the terror that's lurking just underneath the surface. And this trauma is compounded by the systematic desecration of the mother culture throughout history.
Okay, define the mother culture, or the divine feminine in this specific context.
The feminine principle of God, the divine mother, or the mother ray, is the energy that descends into matter to defend God's children against the evil one. It represents this inherent protective, nurturing power that stabilizes the planet.
And this mother ray has been systematically persecuted.
Denied, crucified, across all ages by the fallen ones because it is the fundamental force that protects humanity. The fallen Lemuria, in fact, was attributed to the spiritual pride and decadence that desecrated this mother light.
The source also points out that when the mother energy began to reemerge, it specifically points to the spiritual upheavals of the 1960s. It was immediately attacked.
Immediately. The embodied fallen ones, many of them re-embodied Atlanteans carrying that ancient grudge, they staged their great counter-revolution against the light. They took the legitimate seeking for the divine feminine and spiritual freedom, and they twisted it.
Into what?
Into licentious behavior, chemical experimentation, unchecked promiscuity. They eclipsed the true spiritual renewal with a synthetic, uncontrolled freedom that was actually just another form of bondage.
Okay, so if this history is true, if these power-minded ancient beings are still embodied, then the struggle isn't theoretical, it's ongoing. And this section of our research provides a crystal clear profile of how these embodied fallen angels operate in current society, wielding their power through these pervasive global institutions.
Yeah, the research is blunt about it. They are in positions of power across every major pillar of modern civilization: church, state, finance, education, media, and science. The profile given is chilling.
Describe it.
They're described as irresponsible, trigger-happy, intensely power-minded, and utterly unconcerned with the welfare of humanity.
And their interest isn't just standard greed. I mean, they're after something bigger. Absolute total control.
Exactly. They're not just interested in money because, let's be honest, they already control the means of generating it. They want absolute power and control over the planet itself. And they're masters of disguise, wrapping their objectives in these polished, often benign-sounding humanitarian schemes.
But the core goal is always domination.
Total domination. They promote themselves as gods, surrounding themselves with the most extravagant material trappings as this: shallow substitute for the spiritual kingdom they lost through pride.
Let's start with their primary grip, the global economy. The source material defines this as a fundamentally spiritual problem, not just a mathematical one.
Right. Financial manipulation is a critical component of their control mechanism. The source explicitly names inflation as economic cannibalism.
Economic cannibalism.
Spiritually, inflation is a covert method of robbing savings and future generations of their energy and their opportunity. It debauches the currency, which is precisely what Lenin cited as the quickest way to destroy the foundations of a society.
And the research doesn't stop at just a general critique. It zeroes in on the establishment of the Federal Reserve System.
Oh, it does. The creation of the Fed is cited as the product of a conspiracy of bankers. It specifically notes the historical connection between Max Warburg, the head of the German Reichsbank during the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, and his brother Paul Warburg, who was instrumental in pushing for the central bank here in the United States.
So the claim is that this system was designed for control.
The claim is that this system, deliberately placed out of the hands of the people, can be used to engineer inflation, deflation, recession, or collapse at any time, making it the ultimate lever of planetary control.
That is a staggering accusation, that the global financial architecture is fundamentally a mechanism designed for control, not for stability. And it goes hand in hand with the abandonment of physical assets, doesn't it?
Yes, the source connects financial control directly to spiritual loss through the removal of the gold standard. Gold is described as precipitated sunlight and a focus of Christ light. Its abolishment in favor of volatile paper currency.
It was a deliberate plot.
A deliberate plot to deprive people of gold's naturally healthful and balancing qualities, and to magnetize human consciousness to the lower, material vibrations associated with unstable paper assets. And this is an ancient strategy, the archetype of the ruthless financier, like the historical Jacob Fugger, who simultaneously finances opposing armies and manipulates conflicts for profit. That's recurrent in modern global financial structures.
So if they control the money, the next step is preventing unity. How do they keep humanity, the light bearers, from coalescing and rising up against them?
Through the age-old, tried-and-true strategy of divide and conquer. The primary tactic is to splinter light bearers into every conceivable faction. Right-wing versus left-wing, religious camps, political schisms, two-party systems.
And while we're fighting each other.
Exactly. While people are made to fight one another over what the source calls silly little issues that dominate the headlines, the manipulators gain control quietly through complex, below-the-surface legislation and engineered processes. The fighting itself is the energy they feed on.
Hatred is the fuel.
Precisely. Hatred is the deadly energy used to polarize, steering light bearers off their true mission of spiritual transformation and self-mastery. The source warns that the political process is often camouflaged. While one candidate might seem better than the other, the ultimate winner is frequently a plant of the fallen ones, ensuring the agenda moves forward regardless of who you vote for.
Okay, beyond political schisms, let's talk about the specific methods of psychological and physical attack detailed here, what the research calls the cult of death. This involves terrorism and chemical manipulation.
Terrorism is linked directly to the spiritual state of the fallen angels. Their rebellion against God manifests as spiritual suicide. So, terrorist acts are designed to instill the ultimate fear, terror in victims and in witnesses.
And that terror triggers an energetic response.
It's a spilling of light through the chakras, which then flows directly to the fallen ones. It's a spiritual harvesting of human fear and suffering.
And chemical manipulation seems to be the quiet, systemic, slow-burn version of this spiritual attack, aimed at destroying our receptivity to light.
That's the long game. The source alleges that recreational drugs like marijuana and opium, they weren't natural discoveries. They were created by Luciferian science back on Atlantis and Lemuria.
For what purpose?
Their purpose was to simulate the bliss of the Holy Spirit, a synthetic spirit. It was intended for the self-destroyed fallen ones who were determined to take others down with them in this illusion of a sweet death.
Let's focus on the claimed effect of marijuana specifically, since that's a major societal debate today.
The claim is very detailed. It says that marijuana poisons the deep centers of the brain necessary for the perception and awareness of genuine pleasure. This creates a sensory deprivation, a false void.
So the user is left perpetually chasing something they can never get.
Exactly. A perpetual receding goal of trying to achieve a pleasure that is now chemically sabotaged, leading to dependence and spiritual stagnation.
And the attack is explicitly targeted at future generations through pharmaceuticals.
Absolutely. The source highlights the rampant use of prescription drugs. It cites the specific example of Ritalin for active children as an overarching strategy to destroy the ability of future light bearers to contain light.
So these highly active, creative kids,
They are seen as light bearers with immense spiritual energy, which then chemically suppressed. It dulls their connection to their divine intelligence. The source material is adamant that this is not accidental. It is a strategy. It even backs this up with a chilling statistic. By 2007 in Florida, prescription drug deaths had surpassed illegal drug deaths 3-to-1.
highlighting the explosive nature of this systemic epidemic.
It is an epidemic. Even common addictions like nicotine are given a spiritual diagnosis here. Nicotine is described as a narcotic that creates a density on the surface of the brain, effectively blocking the flow of divine intelligence in connection to the Christ self.
And the sources claim kicking a nicotine habit is harder than quitting heroin.
Because of this specific mechanism of energetic blockage, yes. The point across the board is that all these substances are engineered to lower human frequency and blunt our spiritual awareness.
Okay, finally, let's address one of the most surprising strategies of control: the misuse of sound and rhythm.
Yeah, this knowledge was apparently held by the advanced priests of Lemuria. They knew that the sacred rhythm is 44 time. You find it in marches or a lot of classical music.
And what does that do?
It causes the mother light, the kundalini energy, to gently and safely ascend the spine toward the higher chakras. Rock music, however, often uses a syncopated 44-beat perversion of that sacred rhythm.
So what does a rhythmic perversion do to the energy body?
It forces the spiritual energy to descend counterclockwise, which the sources describe as tearing delicate membranes on the inner bodies. This results in a temporary rush, which is then followed by a slow, chronic bleeding of the life force.
Which manifests physically as...
Early aging and short concentration spans classic signs of energetic depletion. And the source argues that this rhythmic descent of energy logically and directly led to the chaos of the sexual revolution and the subsequent cultural shift toward promiscuity in the 60s, as the kundalini light was violently pushed down into the lower sexual chakras. So, if we accept that these strategies of control have been this pervasive for centuries, then the present moment becomes absolutely critical. It's defined by these massive cosmic cycles and accelerated karma.
And we are in a transitional period, right? Moving out of the Age of Pisces, which was the age dominated by understanding God as the Son, or Christ. And we're entering the Age of Aquarius, which promises freedom, peace, universal brotherhood.
That transition is immense because of a historical karmic debt. The cumulative karma of the past 12 astrological ages, that's a cycle spanning 25,800 years, was originally due at the start of Pisces.
But something happened.
The sources state that Jesus Christ, through his monumental sacrifice, mitigated that descent. He was bearing the sins of the world, which essentially bought humanity time. He pressed a necessary pause button.
But time's up.
Now, in this transition phase, we face the accelerated return of all that complex personal and planetary karma. This is the day of personal and planetary reckoning. And in this context, prophecy is simply a forecast. It's a calculation of this returning negative energy.
And the key distinction here, the thing that provides hope against the overwhelming nature of this whole conflict, is that prophecy is never inevitable.
Never. The free will factor is supreme. The famous story of Nineveh in the Book of Jonah demonstrates that. When a populace repents and changes its collective consciousness, God relents and calamity is averted.
So there's a tool to do this.
There is. The source introduces a powerful tool, the violet flame. It can mitigate or even alter prophecy by transmuting negative energy before it crystallizes into a physical destructive cataclysm.
Okay, let's zoom in on a specific prophecy that caused so much global anxiety. The Mayan calendar, and its end date around 2012.
Right. The Mayan long count calendar generated this intense doomsday focus. However, the Ascended Master El Morya offered a profound clarification on this subject. He stated that the Mayan calendar is, in fact, the calendar of the Nephilim and of their cycles.
Wait, so it charts their timing and their agenda, not God's divine schedule for humanity?
Exactly. The fallen ones have plotted their races on Earth for this specific hour, this cusp of Aquarius, to act as the negative electrode for their final, desperate manipulation. The research states the ultimate objective of the anti-mind and its giant network is the undoing and fall of even the single Son of God, a purpose so important to them that it justifies thousands of years of conspiracy and patient manipulation.
This overwhelming struggle makes the arrival of a golden age seem almost impossible. But the source assures us it is possible, provided we accelerate and, well, clean house first.
A golden age is the divine blueprint for Earth, but it requires the elimination of the consciousness of fallen angels and the creation of a purified environment.
And what does that mean, practically?
Well, the pure souls of the seventh root race, the ones necessary to usher in this age, are currently being held back by the lords of karma. They've determined that the planet is too compromised, too filled with imperfections, physical pollution, the density impressed by fallen angels, to be a fit habitation for these pristine souls.
So the responsibility is squarely on the light bearers who are here now. We have to defend the child, both physically and spiritually, against drug abuse and pollution, and clean up the earth to make it ready.
Which brings us to the final cosmic test, the concept of Armageddon. The Force clarifies that Armageddon is not just an external geographical site like Megiddo in the Middle East.
Here's where the internal spiritual warfare becomes the most immediate and defining challenge of this age.
Armageddon is fundamentally the personal battle between your real self, the Christ within you, and the synthetic self, the dweller on the threshold. And it's waged inside the individual's consciousness. This internal conflict is the warring in our members that determines our peace.
So not resolving this inner battle.
The non-resolution of it results in sickness, darkness, depression, and a lack of peace. The source promises that winning this inner battle makes the light bearer invincible against all external manifestations of the fallen ones.
Okay, so given this overwhelming multi-millennial backdrop of spiritual conspiracy, genetic tampering, and economic manipulation, humanity needs a potent, actionable spiritual strategy. And the first and most difficult step the source identifies is psychological and spiritual, accepting our true divine identity.
That's it. The primary stumbling block to victory is a dual failure. First, failing to recognize the embodied evil in our midst, and second, perhaps more tragically, failing to realize our own boundless divine potential.
And the research is very clear about a specific teaching that has held us back.
It is. The pervasive historical teaching of original sin, advanced by the Church Father Augustine, is labeled a lie that has burdened mankind for centuries, convincing them they are inherently wicked and fundamentally incapable of self-mastery or mastering their environment.
But the example of Jesus Christ proved that mastery is the birthright of every single soul.
It did. The ultimate goal, the very reason for incarnation, is personal Christhood, what the Gnostics called gnosis, or self-knowledge. This is the full manifestation of the universal Christ consciousness, which the Gospel of John refers to as the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world.
Jesus was the way shower.
He demonstrated the path to the climax of the spiritual journey, which is the ascension, where the soul merges completely with the Christ self and becomes an ascended master.
But before we can achieve that final merger, we have to confront the inner enemy, the dweller on the threshold, which sounds like the central mechanism for the external fallen angel's control.
It's the internal weak spot. The dweller is the counterfeiting spirit or the carnal mind, a conglomerate of misqualified accumulated energy. Think of it as the Frankenstein monster that the soul has created over many lifetimes through poor choices and indulgences.
And just like the monster,
the dweller gains massive power as we indulge it, trapping us in cycles of control, making us easy prey for external manipulation by the fallen ones. They simply project their energy onto our existing weaknesses.
the Gnostics stress the importance of knowing this, not self. How do we move beyond just recognizing this inner monster?
We have to choose to actively slay the components of this antithesis of the real self. And that requires rigorous self-analysis and the application of spiritual law. The sources are definitive on this. The only lawful, successful means to win this inner and outer war is through transmutation, using the science of the spoken word.
What makes dynamic decrees spoken aloud so much more effective than just silent prayer?
The science of the spoken word is described as a massive step up from prayer. It's a scientific formula combining affirmation, visualization, and the physical command of breath and sound to direct God's light into the material world. When we speak in affirmation with command, we are physically accelerating energy.
This begins with reclaiming the most sacred identity, I am.
Yes, the affirmation I am that I am isn't just a phrase, it's an empowerment. It's a scientific formula for drawing forth divine power. When you declare, I am the victory over this habit, you are affirming God in me is victory.
And this is crucial for overcoming those subtle, insidious projections of the fallen ones.
Which often manifest as limitations. The beliefs like I am tired, or I am depressed, or I am not good enough. Repeating these decrees builds a powerful physical momentum of light that enables instantaneous transmutation. You are literally rewriting your energetic signature.
When facing the specific millennial-old war of light and darkness that we've been describing, who is the divine protector we should be invoking daily?
Archangel Michael, the champion of faith and protection, leading numberless legions of angels. We are urged to invoke him daily to deal with the vast scale of this age-old war. The sources insist that we must turn over situations that are burdening our hearts, personal addictions, the pervasive spiritual terror, or global issues, by commanding Michael's intercession. You don't have to carry the burden alone.
And the source even provides a specific adapted prayer for modern use.
It does. It recommends utilizing the adapted prayer of Pope Leo III. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in Armageddon, as a powerful tool to bind the seed of Satan and the false hierarchy of Antichrist. This is presented as an immediate practical application of the spoken word to address this large-scale conspiracy.
This leads us to the final, indispensable spiritual tool, the alchemical key for the entire Aquarian age, sponsored by the Master of Freedom himself, Saint Germain.
The violet flame. Saint Germain, the sponsor of the Age of Aquarius, brings this spiritual energy, which is called the alchemical key to world transformation. It's the modern philosopher's stone.
So how exactly does this high-frequency spiritual light work? On a physical and an energetic level.
It works based on frequency. The violet flame is a high-frequency spiritual energy that penetrates the world of matter. Its mechanism is described as stripping atoms and molecules of the dense overlay of human imperfection, all that misqualified energy of fear, anger, anxiety, and restoring their native purity.
It's transmuting karma.
It's transmuting karma without destroying the energy itself. It turns negative momentum back into usable light. It's analogous to turning water into wine. Invoking the violet flame through mantras like, "I am the violet flame," is the single most effective tool for mitigating prophecy and balancing the complex ancient karma created by both light bearers and the fallen angels.
And finally, we have to address that desecrated mother energy for the golden age to arrive.
For the Aquarian age to fully manifest, the mother ray must be safely raised, the kundalini light, throughout all of humanity. And the source provides a specific tool for this, the New Age Rosary.
How does that work?
This involves the universal adoration of the mother ray. It often suggests replacing the traditional emphasis on sinners with the recognition of sons and daughters of God. This practice helps to safely raise these sacred energies, brings the required balance of the divine feminine back to the planet, and directly defeats the strategies of the fallen angels who have sought to deny and desecrate the mother light for millennia. This raises an important question. What happens now? Now that the profile of the enemy, these power-minded, irresponsible, control-seeking fallen angels, is clear. I mean, we've traveled from the cosmic falls of Lucifer and the Watchers through the sinking of ancient continents due to genetic and cultural desecration.
Right, all the way to the modern manifestations of control, from economic manipulation to the chemical suppression of light. The sheer scale of the opposition is now apparent.
It is.
But the research gives us confidence because it emphasizes that God has placed within us the spiritual resources, our inherent Christhood, the science of the spoken word, and the violet flame to meet and overcome these overwhelming multi-millennial problems.
One with God is a majority.
Our silence is consent. Our command is victory. That's the takeaway.
We're called to use our free will to invoke heaven's defense and accelerate ourselves into the golden age, purifying the planet for the souls who are waiting.
So consider this. Given how powerful the momentum of absolute evil is, centuries or millennia old, and knowing it understands the mechanics of reincarnation until its final judgment, what specific, complex, long-standing problem in your life or your community, that constant nagging frustration, that unresolved conflict, that persistent lack of abundance, or that specific fear you just can't shake, what if that is actually a physical manifestation of a laggard's ancient, unmitigated agenda? And how will you use the science of the spoken word, the power of the I am affirmation, and the cleansing violet flame to specifically address and uproot that karmic legacy? The battle is fought within, and that is where the victory begins.